Welcome back to The Critique. Today, we're looking at a draft speech for Prime Minister Netanyahu set in a near-future 2026, marking the Knesset's 77th anniversary after a war and the return of all hostages.
And we have to get right into it because it's rhetorically very strong, very polished, but the structural bridge connecting that military victory to a new push for judicial reform, that's where it starts to feel a bit wobbly.
Yeah, it almost reads like two completely different speeches were sort of stitched together.
They really were. You've got the generation of victory part, and then this very academic argument about checks and balances.
So the core of the issue then is that the speech tries to use all this momentum from the war to justify bringing back judicial reform, but the actual link between the two, it's just not there.
It's tenuous at best. You can almost hear the gears grinding as you read it.
Let's pinpoint that moment. The text gives us a good 5 minutes on celebrating the hostages coming home, down to the last one, as it says.
Right? All this unity, and then, boom, almost without a pause, it pivots into a lecture on political theory.
And that's where the argument it snaps. It feels so abrupt. It feels, frankly, politically opportunistic.
It does. Put yourself in the shoes of someone in the opposition. You're nodding along, you're feeling that unity, that emotional high about the hostages, and then suddenly you're getting a lecture on Plato and the tyranny of the elite.
It's just complete rhetorical whiplash.
It is. The subtext is basically, we won the war, therefore we have to change how judges are chosen. But there's no connective tissue. There's no why.
So it feels like the victory is just being used as a Trojan horse.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's a Trojan horse to bring in an old political fight.
Okay, so to fix this, the suggestion isn't to drop the reform argument, but to reframe it.
Exactly. It can't feel like a separate agenda that's just tacked on. It has to feel like a necessary part of the rebuilding phase. Something that mirrors the unity from the battlefield.
Right, because right now it leans on the American founding fathers, Jefferson, Madison, saying they rejected a king and implying the current judiciary is that king.
Which is a combat metaphor. Think about that. You just finished a literal war, and now you're using war metaphors against your own institutions.
It's so jarring. It's basically saying the war outside is over, now the war inside begins.
The exact opposite of the unity message he starts with. So my suggestion would be, instead of that history lesson, use the war itself as the metaphor.
Okay. How would that sound?
Something like, just as our soldiers realize victory requires every branch of the military working in sync, air, land, and sea, without one dominating the others, our civil government requires that same synchronization.
Oh, that's so much stronger.
Right. It makes the reform feel like a lesson we learned from the war, not a talking point from a think tank.
It's about applying what worked out there to how we work in here.
And while we're at it, just cut the Plato reference entirely.
The bit about Plato canceling democracy?
Yeah, it's too academic, it's aggressive, it immediately alienates the very people you were just praising. Drop the attack on elites and replace it with a call for, say, clarity of roles.
So something like, we need a government that can execute the will of the people as effectively as our army executed the war.
Yes. That's forward-looking. It's about efficacy, not ideology. And that brings us, I think, to the second big issue.
The philosophical core.
The very definition of democracy he's using.
I noticed that too. There's this recurring theme that democracy is at its heart simply majority.
He says it outright. The essence of democracy is the decision of the majority. And, on its face, that sounds fine. But the argument leans so heavily on that one definition that it's just wide open to attack.
Because he's triggering the number one fear of everyone who's not in his coalition.
He's triggering the tyranny of the majority alarm bell. The weakness is that he defines the danger to democracy as the cancellation of the majority's will. But he totally ignores the listener's fear of the majority just running roughshod over everyone else.
And it's funny he brings up the American founders because they were terrified of that.
That's the irony. Madison and Hamilton built checks and balances specifically to slow down the majority, not to unleash it. So when the speaker uses them to justify this, anyone who knows the history just checks out.
And everyone else just hears, we won, so we get to do whatever we want now.
Which is the opposite of a unifying message. So the suggestion here is to bring in a more sophisticated take on democracy. You have to acknowledge the other side's fear to disarm it.
You have to speak to the fear.
If you ignore it, it just gets louder. So let's look at the actual text. He has this really sarcastic question in there aimed at the court.
Who are you? Are there those raised above the people?
It's so combative. It's like a challenge to a duel.
So, cut that and replace it with what?
An invitation. Instead of who are you, say, let us define the boundaries together, as we did in the early days of this Knesset. And then you have to add the sentence that says the quiet part out loud.
Something like, I understand the fear that majority rule can trample rights.
Yes, and go even further. I understand that fear, which is why we seek the specific balance that existed in Israel's first decades, not to crush the minority, but to ensure the majority can actually govern.
Not to crush, but to govern. That's a huge shift.
It completely changes the temperature of the room. It makes the speaker a statesman, not a conqueror. It says, I see you, I hear you, I'm not trying to erase you.
Which is a much better starting point than calling judges kings.
Absolutely. And speaking of the speaker's persona, let's talk about the anecdotes. The time travel bits?
Right, the Fruman House story and the story about visiting the Lincoln bedroom.
They're there to humanize him, obviously. But the problem is, these personal stories occasionally drift into self-aggrandizement, and it distracts from the institution he's supposed to be honoring.
I really felt that with the Fruman House story. It starts out so nostalgic, Jerusalem of old. And then suddenly it's about his time as finance minister.
It pivots so hard. The weakness is that it becomes all about his role. When I was finance minister, I acted to save this asset. We obtained funding. I made the decision. It's just a resume point.
It stops being about the Knesset's history and starts being about his CV.
Exactly. And then you see the same thing in the Lincoln story. He's at the White House with President Trump. He gets taken to the Lincoln bedroom, but the emphasis is all on the access. I was taken where few go.
I was invited in.
Right. It's about his proximity to power, not the shared values between the two nations. It makes him the VIP, not the Knesset, or the people.
And in a speech honoring the parliament should be the hero.
The parliament or the people. The speaker is just the narrator. So the suggestion is to re-edit these stories to focus on the audience and the nation's history, not the speaker's resume.
So, for the Fruman House story, just cut the line about being finance minister.
Not necessary, we know who he is. Lean into the description of the curious citizens gathering around. Make the listener feel that nostalgia. Make them say, oh, I remember that feeling. Not, oh, good for you.
And the Lincoln anecdote?
The real gold in that story isn't the bedroom access. It's the quote. It's Lincoln's definition of democracy. Government of the people, by the people, for the people.
So take out the backstage pass vibe.
Get rid of it. Focus everything on that quote and connect that specific phrase, by the people, to what the Israeli people just went through over the last 2 years.
Because they're the ones who fought the war.
Exactly. The people fought. The people saved the economy. The speech should say, Lincoln talked about government by the people. And in the last 2 years, we saw what the people are truly capable of.
That makes the listener feel like they're the heirs to Lincoln's idea, not just watching from a distance.
It democratizes the greatness, which, leads us right into the final point, which is about the overall tone.
The whole Israeli superpower. It mentions being a top 3 dynamic economy and says Israel is touching global superpower capabilities.
It's very high octane, very triumphant.
But is it too much?
That's the question. The speech projects this very strong image, but that triumphalism risks sounding really out of touch if it's not grounded in the cost of that success.
Because in this scenario, the war is over. The hostages are home, which is amazing, but thousands are still dead or wounded. The country is still grieving.
And that's the weakness. The tone is relentlessly superlative. We return them all. We are a regional superpower. TikTok generation? No, generation of victory. It all lacks a moment of solemn reflection on the trauma. It sounds more like a campaign rally.
It's like spiking the football in the end zone while half your team is being carried off on stretchers.
That's the perfect analogy. You have to celebrate the win, but you also have to acknowledge the injuries. If you just scream we're number one, you sound totally disconnected from the grief that is still very real for your audience.
So the suggestion is to balance the superpower talk with a humbler acknowledgement of resilience.
Resilience is the word. Not dominance, but endurance. That's what needs celebrating.
So how do we fix a line like the top 3 economy one? It sounds like a slide in a presentation.
It's so cold, and it makes it sound like a government achievement. You rewrite it to give the credit to the people. So instead of just stating the rank, you say, despite the crushing costs of war, the ingenuity of our people has kept us among the world's top economies.
That's a compliment, not a boast. It says, you did this.
Exactly. You kept innovating while you were in the reserves. That's what people want to hear.
And what about the global superpower line?
It just invites skepticism. It's a bit hyperbolic. You can soften it.
How?
Replace it with something that's true but more grounded. Like, we have proven that a small democracy can stand firm against threats that would shake much larger nations.
So you're framing Israel as David who won, not claiming Israel is now Goliath.
And in our narrative, David is always the better role model, the few against the many. That's the national story. When you start trying to sound like a massive superpower, you lose that underdog grit that actually brings people together.
That makes a lot of sense. So looking at the whole thing, the central fact of this speech is the successful return of the hostages. We returned them all. That's the anchor.
It is, and the author knows that. But the risk is letting that anchor become a bludgeon. We brought them home, so you have to listen to me about judges. The logic just isn't sound.
So the core advice is about stewardship of the moment.
That's the perfect phrase for it. When you have a winning hand, and bringing the hostages home is a royal flush, you don't need to shout. You don't need to overplay it. You just lay the cards on the table.
Use the political capital to heal, not to conquer.
The war was the conquest. The peace has to be the healing.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap for the team working on this draft. 4 main points.
First, that logical bridge. Connect the victory to the reform using the idea of synchronization, not a lecture on Plato. Make it a lesson from the war.
Second, the definition of democracy. Move beyond just majority rule. You have to acknowledge the minority's fear to lower the temperature.
Third, those anecdotes. Edit the Lincoln and Frumenhouse stories to be about we, not I. Less resume, more shared history.
And finally, the tone. Balance the superpower triumphalism with humility. It's about being David, not Goliath.
And my last actionable takeaway is this. You have a historic victory. The facts of the hostages' return speak louder than any adjective you could possibly use. Let those facts do the work. Use that capital to heal the divides, not to lecture the opposition. If you invite them to build the future with you, you might actually get the reform you're looking for.
That's a really powerful place to end. To our listener, thank you for sending this in. It's an incredible piece to work with. And with these changes, it could be a speech that doesn't just mark an anniversary, but really defines an era.
Yeah, we would love to see the next draft.
Absolutely. Please submit your work back in again for more feedback. Thanks for listening to The Critique.